Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing my January wrap up. So January was kind of a slow start to the year for me. I read 5 things in January. So I finished 1 book, 2 novellas, a graphic novel, and a short story. And I DNF'd 3 books this month, which is a lot for me. And 2 of them I was very surprised by. One of them I went in knowing that like maybe it wasn't gonna work for me, but 2 of them were ones I was really expecting to love. So I'll mention those at the end of the video. But yeah, it was kind of a weird reading month. I didn't get through a whole lot of things, and then most of the things that I did read were pretty short, but I was very much mood reading throughout the month, and I just didn't feel like reading a ton. I didn't really want to push myself with my reading because I feel like I burned myself out a little bit at the end of December because there were quite a few things that I wanted to make sure I finished before the end of the year, and I just was like a little bit tired. So January I was really taking it easy, but I guess, you know, I'm already maybe doing well on my goals for the year because 2 of my goals were to read fewer books this year and to DNF more books. So, you know, I guess those are being successful so far. I'm reaching my goals. All right, so let's get started. So the first book that I read in January was Dreamer's Pool by Juliet Marillier. I've talked about this one before because this was a reread for me, and I talked about that I was planning to have this be my first book of the year. I like to start with a reread, especially of one that I really love. A lot of times I pick a Juliet Marillier book to just kind of start my year off with something I know I'm going to like. This was my first reread of this book because I just have never reread this series before, and it was really interesting to do that. So this is another Celtic historical fantasy that is set in medieval Ireland. It is actually set in the same world as the Seven Waters series, but the 2 series aren't really connected and you could read them separately. In this story we have 3 main perspectives. 2 of them are Blackthorn and Grim, who the series is named after because they are the consistent characters throughout the series. And so Blackthorn is a healer and Grim is her companion, and then our 3rd perspective is Prince Orin. And Prince Orin is a local prince who is about to be married, but when his bride-to-be arrives, there's something a little bit off about her. There's a mystery surrounding her, and so he enlists the help of Blackthorn and Grim. It does take a while to get to that mystery because they're kind of establishing themselves in this community. Towards the beginning of the book, they are actually just entering this new community because previously at the very start of the book, they're actually, Blackthorn and Grim are both in prison, and then Blackthorn is offered a deal by a fae for her freedom and her life, and she thinks that the price may be too high to pay, but her only alternative is execution, and so she takes the deal, and that sets Blackthorn and Grim on this trajectory to find this like community, which then they get involved with Orin and his mystery. I really enjoyed this reread. I think that the Blackthorn and Grim trilogy may be my 2nd favorite series by Juliet Marillier. My first, of course, being the Seven Waters series, but I think this is probably my 2nd favorite series. This one has a slightly lighter feel to it, I think, than the Seven Waters series. Rereading this was interesting because I got to see some like hints and foreshadowing that I may not have noticed before the first time I was reading it because I didn't know to look for it, or I just have forgotten because I feel like there is a lot about this book that I had forgotten, and a lot of details that I forgot. I would put content warnings on this for kidnapping, abuse, sexual assault, and suicide. But overall, I really enjoyed this reread. I'm excited to reread the rest of this series. Of course, I always love reading Juliet Marillier's books, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished was Come Tumbling Down by Seanan McGuire. This is the 5th book in the Wayward Children series. This is her newest release that just came out in January. And this series of novellas follows children who have traveled to magical portal worlds through various doors. And now they are back in our world and them kind of dealing with being back in this world. So either helping them to adjust or just letting them have a place to be while they're waiting and hoping for their door to reappear so that they can go back to their magical world. And in this series, the books kind of go, every other book is in the current timeline at the School for Wayward Children, and every other book is like a backstory book for one of the characters where we get to travel to their magical world and find out more about the backstory there. So this one is one of the books that is in the current timeline, catching up with the characters at the School for Wayward Children. We get to see a lot of characters from the previous books, but especially Jack and Jill. So Jack shows up at the school to ask for help because she has gone back to the moors, her magical world, with her sister Jill. Something has gone wrong and now she needs help to kind of set things right. And I really enjoyed this book, and I was a little bit surprised by that because I knew that this was following Jack and Jill and would take place in the moors, which is not my favorite setting. Down Among the Sticks and Bones was actually one of my least favorite in the series so far, so I wasn't expecting to really love this one, but I feel like this might be one of my favorites of the series now. I think that one of the things that's nice about it is that we are returning to a world, and so there's a level of familiarity, and the world building was able to kind of expand and go to another level because we already knew the moors, like the basics of the moors already. And I loved what we got to find out more about the moors and the world and the different like politics and characters and the system that works there. Of course, it is a very short book, it's a novella, so we don't get a ton of world building, but what we do get in this I really enjoyed, and I just think added to it so much. I think though also the thing that made me especially love this one is that it felt like a complete story. With pretty much all of the previous books in this series, like I always really enjoy them, but I always feel like there's something wanting. There's something that I feel like was not developed enough, or that they like skipped over information or periods of time that I felt like should not have been skipped. And of course, these are novellas, and so decisions have to be made about what's going to be cut. And like I understand that, and so I still really like the series, but I always would end each book feeling like there was something wanting. And I felt like this one did not leave me with that feeling. This felt like a complete story, and it's the first one in the series that I've gotten that complete satisfaction from the story, and I really enjoyed this, and I gave this 4 stars. Next, I finished a graphic novel, which is The Girl from the Other Side. This is the first one in the series. This actually might be a manga. I'm not totally sure, but I don't usually read manga, so I don't know what the difference between a graphic novel and a manga is. But this, I've seen a few people talking about it recently, and so it just inspired me to pick it up. This is about a world where there is a curse that is passed through touch. If you are touched and get the curse, you turn into a monster like this guy on the front here. And so humanity is like walled itself off, and they have created the inside and the outside, and the people on the inside are humans and are safe from the curse, and everything on the outside are the outsiders, are the monsters who have been cursed. But there is this little girl who has befriended one of the outsiders, and it is about their friendship and this outsider trying to take care of her and make sure that she doesn't like catch the curse, so like they can't touch. And it just is so like sweet. It's a very sweet story of these two and their friendship, and it is sadder than I was expecting it to be. I expected it to be a little bit dark, and it has a little bit of darkness to it, but I wasn't expecting it to be sad. But it is also just a very sweet story of these two and their friendship, and I really enjoyed it, and I want to read the rest of the series. Next, I read The Raven and the Reindeer by T. Kingfisher, and this was a gift from my friend Kara, so thank you very much for this. Unfortunately, I didn't really love this. It was a very like middle of the road. There were things that I liked and things that I didn't like about it, so I'll talk about them. So first of all, the premise of this is that it is a retelling of the Snow Queen, and we are following our main character, Gerta. She thinks that she is in love with her neighbor, Kay, and when he gets abducted by the Snow Queen, she decides to go after him and try to save him, and along the way, she makes friends with a bandit and a raven and a reindeer, and some other creatures along the way. So some of the things that I did like like about this book. I liked the direction that it took with the retelling. I thought it was an interesting take on the story, and it went in a direction and made some changes that I had not expected and that I haven't really seen a lot of retellings of this story do before, so I really appreciated that. I think that there was some magic in this that I was very intrigued by, because there is some magic where she, in her dreams, communicates with like plants and the land, and I'm always a sucker for any kind of nature magic, so that was really interesting to me. I loved the characters that were animals in this. They were probably the best part of this book for me. They were very funny. They had a lot of personality. I liked the way that she wrote them. I liked that they had, like, they could communicate with people, but they still were animals, and so they always have like these funny takes on things because they're coming from an animal perspective. So I just really enjoyed them a lot. The reason I latched on to these animal characters so much is because I didn't think that the human characters had very much personality to them. The animals had a lot of personality and I just really enjoyed them, but the humans I felt were kind of flat and weren't really interesting to me. I also liked that this challenged the not like other girls trope. There also is a female-female romance in this, which is cool because you don't see a lot of that in fantasy books. I didn't think that the romance was done especially well, especially because, okay, there were two main issues that I had with the romance. The first one is that it happened really quickly and it felt like it came out of nowhere, and it just, there was no build up to it. There was no, I didn't feel like there was any real connection between the two characters. It just sort of happened. Then my other issue with the way that these characters get together, I'm gonna try and be kind of vague about it because I don't want to spoil anything, but they're in a scenario where Goethe's life depends on this other character, and Goethe is fearing for her life. She is the prisoner of this other character, and then the other character kisses her. And that is kind of how their relationship starts. And I feel like that created a really weird power imbalance in which Goethe didn't really have the ability to like really make a choice about how she felt. And I just felt like the way it was framed, it was supposed to be this kind of like charming way for these characters to get together because it was like this high tension environment. But the thing that ultimately dragged this book down for me was the lack of character development, especially for Goethe. Because, so she starts out the book being very self-critical. She doesn't really value herself because she believes she's in love with her friend Kay, and he is very like hot and cold with her and very dismissive of her and does not value her, and so she kind of has learned to not value herself. And by the end of the book, I think we're supposed to feel like she has grown and gained more self-worth over the course of the story, but really she hasn't. She's really just transferred the responsibility for her self-worth to a different love interest. And that is the thing that I found most frustrating. So with all of that being said, I would be interested to try something else by T. Kingfisher because, as I said, I had mixed feelings about this. There were some things that I liked and some things that didn't work for me, but I liked enough of it that I would try something else by her, and I would be interested to see if this is an anomaly and maybe this just wasn't a good place for me to start because it wasn't going to work for me, and maybe I'll like her other things, or maybe she's just not an author for me and just doesn't tell stories in a way that I like. Who knows? But I would try something else from her. I gave this one 3 stars. And then I read one short story, which was from the anthology From Ashes to Magic. So the short story that I read was the one that was written by my friend Abby Paul. The title of it is, I think, The Sulphur Night. Yes, The Sulphur Night by Abby Paul. So I was really excited to read that short story because this is her first published work, so that's super exciting. I'm very proud of her. So of course, my opinion of this may be a little bit biased because I'm very proud of my friend. But I really did enjoy this short story, and I think that short stories can be very difficult to do. I think this one did a really good job of drawing me in right away. The way that my friend described this story to me before I read it was that it is following a group of children who are growing up under the control of a cult who killed the last dragon. The story was kind of like different from what I was expecting it to be, but also just really interesting. It is following these children pretty much just all in one room because they are being held captive and they don't really understand why, and many of them were like kidnapped and held captive from a very young age, so they really don't know much about the world or kind of how they even ended up where they are now, and they're trying to kind of piece together like why are they here and what is happening to the children who are then disappearing from the room, and also just them trying to survive. And this I thought was a really interesting story. I would be interested to see more about these characters and kind of what happens to them after this. They weren't necessarily likable characters, but I did think that they were very interesting. I also liked the writing style of this. I think that this short story also did a good job of not trying to do too much in such a short format, because that's usually my main complaint with short stories, is that in such a short form of fiction, a lot of times they try to do too many things in such a short format, and I felt like this one had just the right amount of story and world building. So those are all the books that I completed this month. Then, as I said, I had 3 DNFs. The first one was Wink Poppy Midnight, and this is the one that I kind of knew that I may not like, but I wanted to try it to see what I would think of it, and I ended up not liking it. I got about 50% of the way through in the audiobook and decided to give up on it. The other 2 DNFs that I have were real surprises to me though. The first one is The Library at Mount Char by Scott Hawkins, and this is one that I really expected to love this. And my last DNF for the month is another surprise, which was A Winter's Promise by Christelle Dabos. This one I got about 250 pages into it, which is about halfway, so it's quite a far way into it. All of these though I'm going to be talking about more in my winter DNFs video that'll be coming out after I do my February DNFs, and I'll kind of go into more why I DNF'd these. And then to end on a more positive note, I'll tell you what are the books that I am reading right now that I started in January and I will be finishing in February. So the first book that I read a good chunk of, I read about like 55% I think in January, is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I've been listening to the audiobook of this. Like a lot of people, I saw the new movie of it and absolutely loved it, and so I wanted to read the original book. I saw the 90s version of Little Women when I was younger, but I don't think I ever got around to reading the book, so I decided to listen to the audiobook of it, and I said I'm about 55% of the way in, and I've been enjoying it, although I am starting to kind of lose steam on it a little bit, so I'm gonna keep going with it, but I'm kind of slowing down on listening to it. The other book that I am reading right now is Lady Hotspur by Tessa Gratton. This is just the dust jacket because the actual book is on the other side of the room and I don't want to get it. But this is her new release that came out in January. It's set in the same world as The Queens of Innis Lear, which I absolutely loved last year. I feel like as I keep thinking about that book, I keep loving it more and more. I have a full review for it that I'll link below if you're interested in it. But so I'm currently reading Lady Hotspur, which is set in that same world, but this is a retelling of Shakespeare's Henry IV. And this one doesn't take place on Innis Lear, so it has a very different feel to it. The first like 50 pages were a little bit rough for me because I felt like they just kind of threw a lot of names of like people and countries at you to try and establish like who are all of the different players in this situation, because the story starts with a coup, and so you have to know like who's overthrowing who and who's allies with who, but that just like wasn't a really interesting way to start it. But after those first 50 pages, it starts to really get to like the characters and the real story of it, and I'm much more into it now that I have gotten past those first 50 pages. I'm hoping that I'm going to continue to like it. I hope that this is going to become one that I really love because I loved the other one in this world. So that is all for my January wrap up. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!